So today we're going to talk about the topic that was least talked about, I think, at conference. We're going to talk about romantic love and partnership and how ideas of Ayn Rand and objectivism are integrated into that kind of love. So we have Tom and Angel, Matt and Terry. They were the only couples that attended the conference. Yeah. But I think that we're going to have many more in the future years. That's the trend, I guess.
The big question is whether or not we'll still be couples at the end of the
Well, I will try to be gentle with my questions. So, let's start with maybe not an easy but a short question. How would you define love? This is a question for all of you. What is your inner definition of it?
I totally think the philosophers should go first.
Abdication of responsibility. We're off to a great start, Matt.
Yeah.
I would define it as like a profound type of valuing, I think, to be very, very brief. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a response you have to somebody or something that deeply connects with you, or connects with your most fundamental values, and romantic love is one form of love, and friendship and a deep valuing of a passion or of a place or of a thing is another kind, but I think romantic love is almost its own concept within love.
Yeah, and speaking of our relationship, I think about it as there's all these other values we've been talking about this whole time, but to me it's the ultimate level of trust. And we all aspire to trust our friends and our colleagues, but in this case you have one person that you trust absolutely, and that's hard to accomplish.
I'm not even going to correct you on that one.
Fine, see, we agree on something.
Okay, so when I think about myself, and when I think about myself like 5 years ago, my idea of what love is was probably way different than it is now. So I was wondering, has your understanding of love evolved during the time? And how did objectivism influence your definition of what love is?
I won't abdicate this time. And this is something Angela spoke about very early on. I think it's built on self-respect. And you can't love someone else unless you love yourself. And to think about it in a different way, imagine not loving yourself and subjecting someone that you thought you loved to that lesser package, right? Like, why would you do that to somebody else? But I sort of learned this from characters in her novels just when I was a kid, trying to figure out who I was. Just want to correct that.
No, but no, it's, yes, of course, love evolves as you're together. I mean, Matt and I have been together longer than any of you have been alive, I guarantee. I mean, we got together in 1983 and got married in 1986. So, I mean, we've been through...
How old were we when we met?
I was 2. 22 and 20, well, no, 19.
No, it was like 19 and 18?
19 and 20.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously...
So we're thinking this might work.
Maybe.
So far.
I don't know. How much longer do we have on this panel?
Should we stop now?
Yeah, we should quit while we're ahead. So obviously, like, your idea of yourself when you're in college, when we were your age, is very different than what our ideas of self and love are at our age, which I'm not going to admit to at this point. But I mean, I think that I think we value each other more so now, given everything that we have gone through. It's not always easy, but our relationship has never
Particularly
wavered.
now we're explicitly working together as business partners,
Right.
and that's become a very important part of our personal relationship.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, before I understood objectivism, I mean, I was quite young. I thought love was something you couldn't really define, and it was just kind of this mysterious thing that either you felt sometimes or you didn't. There were no like prerequisites for it, and I was also raised somewhat religious, so there were all these ideas about you should love your neighbor, you should love everybody, and that actually is really confusing to the matter, because then what's different about your spouse, your partner, as compared to, you know, your neighbor? And so I think with understanding objectivism, my thinking has become a lot more methodical, but that doesn't change. I know we're going to get to the spark and the passion and everything, and that's still there. But you can understand that there are reasons for it, and there are particular things, and maybe you don't understand right away, but there are particular things in another person that you're responding to, and you can begin to identify those. And there was a second point, but you can make it.
I'll make another point anyway. For me, when I was the age that most of you are now, not to sound too old either, but that was well over a decade ago, then I thought I knew what love was then. And looking back on it, what I thought love was then turned out to be infatuation or desire, an intense wanting of somebody, whether it's for some personality traits or for a physical attraction. It's not the same thing as love when you have that real fundamental value connection and that kind of trading relationship where both of you enhance each other's lives. Until you achieve that with someone, you've not really experienced love. So what I learned from being with Angel was that I didn't really know what love was, at least what romantic love was before that. It's something I only really discovered.
Wasn't that a song?
Probably. I mean, there's so many songs about love, so I don't know.
I don't sing that tonight. Okay, so we usually, at least in my opinion, evolve and learn where there are some situations that kind of are new and that we have to work through. So, what was the biggest lesson about love that you learned during your relationships?
I've just done mine, so do you want
I'm repeating questions then.
To put it in objectivist terms, don't evade. Don't ignore anything. Because even it was Leopold who was talking about all the little things, and you may not even sort of consciously realize what it is you don't like or aren't comfortable with in a situation. This does not mean drop somebody because of something small. You know, there may be things you need to think about, or you may need to talk to the person about. But in my past relationships, the number of things I ignored or evaded, it snowballs. It adds up over time into a picture that really, you know, you look back and you think, oh my God, why did I waste so much time on that? Versus in a healthy relationship, if there's something small, you can just talk about it, you know, and you can deal with it right away, and it doesn't become a big problem.
I spoke last.
And Terry yelled at me once we were giving this talk at one of these events, and I came up with this corny math that when it comes to a real relationship, 1 + 1 = 3 or 5 or 1,000. And she's an engineer, so this upsets her greatly.
I still maintain that he married me because I could do calculus, and then I could help him through his graduate microeconomics classes.
I mean, that was super sexy at the time. But I think, and there is this trend, if you spend too much time on Twitter like I do, there's a trend where people are trashing relationships and they're rejecting the idea that they should connect with somebody else, whether it's marriage or something else. And part of it's sort of this wacky environmentalism where having kids is considered inherently evil because people are evil on the earth. But it's a dangerous trend because, yes, we're all individualists, and yes, we can live our lives alone, and sometimes you have to walk alone on various things. But I think the power of this philosophy we're talking about is the power of collaboration, and actually doing things together is better than doing things alone. But it has to be based on understanding, and usually in our relationship, I do all the compromising, and that works well.
like we said, we may or may not survive this hour. So I'm going to go on a different tact. So when we first got married, I was working as an engineer, and I had my own life, and I had my own career, and I did a lot of traveling. So we spent a lot of time apart. Our joke always was, probably not that much of a joke, that we'd been married for 20 years, but had been together for 10. And so that's why it actually worked. But then as life has evolved and we started working together and it's together 24/7, I thought it would be harder than it is. And I'm surprised that it's not. That most of the time we don't want to kill each other.
Did you just really say you're not as big of an asshole as I thought you were?
Maybe.
Frankie, I wanted to ask you, what was the thing that kept you going through all those separation periods?
Looking forward to seeing him when I got back into town.
Phone sex?
That was so long ago, we didn't actually have cell phones.
Yeah.
So that was a problem, and we couldn't afford long distance bills, so you just made that up.
Can I add something on that point as well? Not that point, the question you asked. About long distance and keeping things going, is that we got together right at the onset of COVID-19. So we'd been flirting before that, but we formally decided to be a serious relationship in basically February of 2020. So we, our first year really of dating properly was...
It's probably important to mention that I was in the US and he was in the
yeah,
UK.
I was going to say, our first year
It was long.
was no contact. We couldn't see each other because we were stuck on opposite sides of the Atlantic during lockdown. So we had to come up with everything under the sun that we could to maintain contact and maintain our relationship. And we were playing chess online. We were watching movies synced up with each other. You usually won, but I got better. And we showed each other places on Google Earth, Street View, touring each other's towns and cities and things like that. So we just we wrote a whole article about this. We came up with endless ways to maintain the relationship through that period until we were able to travel again and see each other again. So it can be done if you're in a long distance relationship, but it does take an extra degree of effort in my experience.
And how did you two meet? We don't know that story.
Do you want me to do this?
Go for
it. Yeah, we met at an Objectivist conference actually in November 2016. Hung out a few times after that, and then sort of fell out of contact. But then you got a work placement in Paris, and I happened to be visiting Paris, and so we decided to just catch up as in a casual way, and ended up walking for hours and hours around the whole of the center of Paris, and couldn't stop talking to each other. And clearly had something and just kept talking online. And then I went to Boston, saw you again. You came back to England and saw me, and it just spiraled very quickly. But it's when you have real connection with someone, it just happens, and you can just tell. It doesn't need forcing. It doesn't need defining. It just happens. I found there was never a "will you go out with me" or anything. It just fell together, and that's my experience of how good relationships come about.
So. I know a lot of you have heard us talk probably too much, but how many of you have heard our origin story of how we got together? A couple of you. Can I bore you? I'll do a quick version of it. It's completely the opposite of Leopold when he said, after all of those years he saw his current wife, and it was love at first sight. It was not that for us at all. The short version is that Matt was looking for a date for a spring formal and had been turned down twice, and asked someone what my last name was so that he could look me up in this ancient thing called a phone book, and call me, and he left a message saying that he wanted to ask me something. And on my side of things, I had also been asked out to a different formal by someone else, to a different group. And my calculus was that I didn't really know either one of them that well. But the other guy, I didn't know the people in his fraternity, and I didn't know the girls there, so I decided that if he turned out to be a jerk, I would have a miserable night. But if I went out with Matt and he turned out to be a jerk, I actually knew a lot of his fraternity brothers and a lot of my friends were going to be there. So I could still have a good time if he was a jerk. So I was his third choice and he was my lesser of two evils. And so that's the very romantic start for us.
So it's definitely not Dominique seeing Howard Rourke all sweaty and hot in the rock forest saying, I gotta have that dude.
I mean, that said, that was May, and I had my last date with someone else that July. So it was within 3 months we were exclusive. So it was not the most romantic start, but it was pretty obvious very early on that this was the thing for us. And I don't think you had any other dates after July? Was that it?
That wasn't a question, was it?
No.
Okay, so objectivism values reason and logic over emotions, but emotions are part of every romantic relationship. So how are you managing to balance emotions and reason in your relationships?
I think it's important to point out that objectivism is not anti-emotion. It is pro-reason and pro-emotion. But you make your decisions, your emotions are a data point when you make your decisions. You make your decisions based on reason. Now, emotions are your means of experiencing your values. And so in a relationship, you're with, your highest value, and you should be, hopefully, going about your life pursuing your values together. And so if you're not feeling emotions during that, there is something deeply wrong. Or to put it in a better way, that's, feeling all of that as fully as you can is how you can live life to the fullest and to be as happy as possible. Where reason comes in, I think, is mostly just, if you guys just, I know we're going to get to disagreements. I don't mean to keep preempting you, but if you have a disagreement or something, and you guys can't decide, you can't agree on something, you're never going to find somebody you agree on everything 110% of the time. But so you use your reason the best you can to resolve disagreements, but
I just want to add, there are certain phrases you never say in a relationship. Calm down is the most obvious one. But in an objectivist relationship, the ultimate insult you can give your partner is to call them irrational. Or possibly accuse them of evading. That's the other one. But so if the I word gets dropped in a heated conversation, then everything, the press is stopped, everything comes to a halt, and analysis is required before anything can start moving again.
I sort of like, and I think Ayn Rand would agree with this, but I don't know. But we're a package deal as people, so it's reason and emotion, and it's in some ways hard to separate those things. I process the world through economic logics, but I consider myself to be an extreme weirdo in that sense. But I will say, if you want to stress test your marriage and see whether or not that trust is really there, when she asks, does my ass look fat in these jeans? You have to have the courage to give her the honest answer.
Which is no.
Which is no. Always 100%, never no. Do you want to respond to that?
I got nothing. It's not reason and it's not emotion, but clearly humor plays a strong role in our relationship.
Okay, so you mentioned already, but how do you handle situations where your partner's actions or decisions are in conflict with your own?
You want to start?
I mean, they never have been in a serious way, I don't think. And that's because I found a partner who shares my fundamental values. And even in my previous relationships where that wasn't the case, I don't think there was ever a severe conflict because I always had some sense of the kind of person I belonged with. I don't generally get into any form of relationship with somebody who I'm likely to have a diametric disagreement with on something. When we have minor things, like, I wish you hadn't said that in front of this person, those sorts of disagreements, then it's usually the best practice we try to employ is to leave the conversation about it until we've both got past the moment, because if you turn around to somebody in the heat of a moment and say, I wish you hadn't said that, and then you need to, the emotions are just there straight away, and you're still trying to deal with the situation and everything that's going on. So we generally try and have conversations about any disagreements we have after the fact, when the emotions have calmed down, and we both recognize that both of us need time to get out of a situation before we can analyze it rationally. But none of those have ever been serious things. I don't think we have any significant disagreements or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think we have that deep bond of trust that Matt was talking about. And so when you have that, when you have relatively minor disagreements, I think you can trust that neither one of you is fundamentally immoral or hates the other. You know, we might joke about things going wrong, but fundamentally you know that that's not the case. So if fundamentally he is a smart, moral person, then I should know that whatever is going on top of that, I need to kind of get to the point where to see either I'm wrong or he's wrong or we're both wrong, and we can figure out where that is. There's also the role of compromise in the sense of like things that are not that important. Like you take turns picking what movie to watch, and I won't give away our big thing that we all four do later, but yeah, just trust the person when it comes to the important stuff, I think.
I was just going to quickly add that we've generally observed when we have gone through this process that 90% or more of our disagreements are not because either of us did something wrong, but because we misunderstood each other.
Yeah.
It's just a communication, which is really great with British and American English. Britain and America really are two countries separated by a common language. There's a surprising amount of a number of ways in which you can express the same thing completely differently in British and American English.
I very much underestimated the cultural differences situation.
It's not just tea and biscuits and things like that. It's a lot deeper. But that plus the fact that I'm a bit strange when it comes to how I think and how I vocalize things to begin with. So we talk past each other sometimes, and it usually we both know that neither of us ever has malicious intent towards the other. We never mean each other harm or insult. So it's almost certainly going to be either just a slip of control or a miscommunication. It's almost always a miscommunication.
So it's funny that I think the biggest argument that Terry and I have ever had was about whether or not we should get married in the first place. Because, and bless Terry's heart that she would put up with this, but I was an insufferable objectivist, purist. Everything is black and white. I've got everything figured out. And I knew that getting married was going to degrade our relationship by going to a church and getting permission and going to the state and getting a license. And I'm like, why on earth would you subject this very precious thing to those institutions? And you'd be surprised to know that Terry won that argument.
I thought that our biggest fight was on our wedding night when we were trying to leave for our honeymoon and discovered that you had left your luggage in the best man's car. And it was so long ago there weren't cell phones, so we couldn't just call Dennis and say, can you bring that suitcase back to us? I remember that being a knockdown drag-out.
And then we sobered up and realized that we didn't really need clothes on the honeymoon.
That is actually true. And Dennis delivered the luggage the next morning. So we had a very romantic first morning having breakfast with our friend Dennis at McDonald's, getting Matt's suitcase.
I'm just impressed that you guys were awake enough to have a knockdown argument after your wedding. We were asleep by 8 p.m. Like, nobody tells you, it's very tiring.
I also, on our wedding day, both
this has just turned into true confessions.
Well, it's worth noting that I left the security tag in my wedding trousers. I hadn't tried them on beforehand, so I had to get this giant security tag cut out of my trousers so we could actually have a wedding. And then also didn't think to bring any other clothes besides my wedding clothes for our week-long honeymoon that we were going on afterwards, so then had to go on a shopping trip for all of my clothes as well.
So our very romantic first day together was going to Asda, which is British Walmart, so he could pick up a Yoda Christmas t-shirt.
Baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda, excuse me.
I guess guys here have a problem.
Nothing but problems.
Since we're doing confessions, I'm not married, if anybody wants to ask.
Was that an invitation?
Okay, so one thing that I noticed in a lot of couples is that when they get together, they lose a bit of who they are. They become, like you listen to one type of music and now you're listening what your partner likes, you watching TV shows that he likes. And I think that is a pretty common thing that is happening in relationships, but I don't think that's happening in your relationships. So, how do you maintain your individuality while being in a relationship?
I mean, I think I don't think it's actually that hard to do. I mean, I have my interests, and he has his. I love to do yoga, or at least I did before the lockdowns killed all of the great yoga studios in DC, but he never felt like he had to take that up to spend time with me. And so that's my own thing. I have my own friends. I travel by myself sometimes. So I have my thing. Matt would retire tomorrow and go to every single Grateful Dead concert that's happening this year. And I'll go to some of them with him, but he goes off and does his own. I don't think it's been a problem at all for us to maintain our separate interests and still get together once in a while and go out to dinner.
So I'm going to go in a very different path and try to be serious for once, but I found this great quote from Dominique in The Fountainhead. If I found a job, a project, an idea, or a person I wanted, I'd have to depend on the whole world. And one of the things in our professional careers, and this only goes one way, so it's my responsibility, but sometimes my political enemies would go after her. And that's an Achilles heel that I still don't know how to manage.
Well, you could stop by making so many enemies that try to take me out.
Yeah, maybe stop pissing everybody off.
It's just a suggestion for a longer, happier marriage.
We've had a little bit of that too, but I think the deeper thing is to both respect yourself and the other person as independent individuals. Like, I married a trained geek who loves science and philosophy, and if I ever tried to take him away from that, not that I ever would, but then he wouldn't be the same person that I fell in love with. So it's a deep respect for him, and then in terms of maintaining my own goals and interests, like obviously we talk about them with each other, we support each other, but they're still my goals and interests. I go to a ballet class every week and those kinds of things, and those are mine. And the other thing is, on a practical side, like, and you guys I know do this too, we're not afraid to split off when we're traveling. On our honeymoon, my mother-in-law was shocked to learn that he was going to a train museum and I was going to a botanic garden. And we're doing the same thing tomorrow, actually. But you don't need to be with each other 24/7, like you're saying. He didn't need to do yoga with you to spend time with you to have a good relationship. So I think it's important to maintain your own interests.
I'll drop an anecdote and then make a serious point. The anecdotal point is that we have our mutual interest, our respective interests in gardens and horticulture and in railways and transportation. And both of us respect and encourage the underlying value of curiosity in both of those interests. And so we're both interested in supporting each other and to some extent learning about each other's interests. But also these things don't terribly interest the other person. So we struggle to remember those things. So I'll show her a train that she'll name a caterpillar, and she'll show me a plant that I'll name a spiky doodle. And she'll tell me the real name, and I'll tell her the real name, and we'll just start having pet names and stupid ways of remembering the things from each other's interests. So we have a way of playing with the fact that we have different interests. The more serious point is that it's also important, I think, to maintain other relationships, friendships, and family as well, but primarily friendships, as ways of having somebody with whom to share those other values that you don't share with your partner, because you're never going to share every value with one other person. There isn't a single person in the world who's going to be the same as you on everything. So although we can go to a Nightwish concert together because we both like that kind of music, if I want to go see Iron Maiden or Trivium or something, or if I want to go see John Wick 4, which she's not remotely interested in, I have other people I can...
What's the matter with you?
But yeah, I have other people for those things, so it's useful to maintain other friendships where I can share the other things that I can't share. And some of those are like the Aristotle classes of friendship we were talking about the other day. Some of those are use friendships where I just have that friend to do that thing with. And some of them are serious, deep friendships, relationships, where I can also share a certain type of comedy or a certain type of film or whatever with that person as well.
I'm too good at this. But it really is hard for people. Like, I literally had a friend who was going to his girlfriend's university classes because she was too bored to go by herself.
Well, when I said that Matt married me for calculus, I did actually go to his graduate level microeconomics classes so that I could understand the theory, so that I could help him apply the calculus to it. So I did that.
Okay, I didn't see this coming. Okay, well, we mentioned a bit of heat before already, but how do you see the role of romance and passion in long-term relationships?
Romance and passion.
Mm-hmm.
They seem very important to long-term relationships to me, and that's about all I can come up with. So do you want?
I think it's a combination of realizing that if you don't have romance and passion, it's not going to be any fun. So, make time for it, go on date nights, that kind of thing. And also finding the romance in the little moments, like going to the grocery store together and that sort of thing. Like, life isn't always romantic moments on the beach. But if you're doing them with the right person, then it's like life on easy mode. And so appreciate that, even though it's not that sexy.
Who was it who was talking about seeing the beauty in the trivial?
Leopold.
Yeah, it's that.
Leopold.
Shout out to Leopold in the rafters there.
Yeah.
I used your question, I asked them how they met. Lesson learned.
Romance and passion, I'm going to give the old man answer, and then Terry's probably going to yell at me. But one of my biggest regrets in life, and maybe Terry agrees with me,
It's
that
not marrying me, right?
we didn't start our own business and work just 100% together until 6 years ago. And we did all sorts of cool things in our life, but I think there is no separation from our romantic passions as a couple and the cool things that we try to achieve in our work. And we can't separate them, and we don't actually know, usually when we're in bed and it's hot and heavy, it's because we're trying to get a new film to market, and she's on one iPad and I'm on the other. I don't know, is that sexy? I think so. I'm never going to have sex again.
You have a lot to make up for.
Did I kill the panel?
Yes.
That was it.
Why is everyone standing?
What's next?
Okay, should I ask another question?
Please, God, yes.
It's a pretty similar one though, so maybe we should skip it.
You answer it right this time.
Yeah, well, I think this question is more for you because we've been together since
Ever?
ever, yeah, Stone Age.
The Stone Age. I'm not that old.
Time immemorial, I think, is the expression.
Oh wait, that broke something.
Yeah,
It's okay, I did it earlier.
it wasn't like caveman style where I clubbed her over the head and dragged her back home.
You broke her fantasies now. Okay, I know where I got. How do you maintain the spark and excitement in your relationship over the time while still staying true to your individual goals and priorities?
I mean, I don't really see a connection between having passion and spark in your marriage and giving up your own true self. I mean, they're two very different things, and I don't think you have to give up your personal self to have passion in life and in your marriage. So, I mean, we have been together like for a very long time, and we still, I mean, I think things are still okay. But he's incredibly considerate and goes out of his way to do just very nice little things for me. For instance, we realized when we were traveling here that it was we were traveling on Easter, and we were sitting at the Munich airport. I keep forgetting which airport we were in. And he went out to take a walk in the airport and came back and had bought me, he called it an Easter bag because there wasn't an Easter basket. And so it was just a very thoughtful, romantic gesture of him, and he put champagne and chocolate in the bag for me, which were, you can never go wrong with that. Did I embarrass you? I also had already posted that on Instagram, so everybody probably already knew about it.
I'll just quickly add that we had this spirit of innovation from the time that we were apart during COVID, where we were just constantly having to make up new ways of keeping things interesting. So we've kind of continued that, and we're always looking for a new achievement, a new thing to do. So maintaining that freshness, constantly experimenting and doing things together that you've not done before. And that may sound like I'm doing innuendo, but I mean in all sorts of ways of relationship, like doing this is something we've never done before. And we want to go to Australia later in the year, and we're both writing, and we also support each. It's an interesting situation, I think, for both couples in that we're both working and living together. So we have an extra dimension of exploration and closeness to develop, because we're developing projects professionally together as well as our enjoyment and as well as our personal lives.
Yeah, I think to sort of sum that up, it's make time to do things that are special and different, whether it's an Easter bag in the airport or going to Australia, like whatever you have time for, whatever works for you guys, something special and out of the norm.
If you had to give only one piece of advice to somebody about romantic love, what would it be? That's for all of you.
So honesty is the most important thing, and I do mean honesty in the objectivist sense of the word, as in never faking reality. There are some situations where you shouldn't tell the truth, like does my bum look bigger? This question might be one of them, but also, sort of basic things like, have you got a surprise for me? No. Like, there are certain situations where you lying gently, a white lie might be appropriate, but being honest all the time, and really being honest means telling the other person all of your feelings when it's appropriate to. So this is something I never had in any past relationship, and I've helped friends deal with it in their relationships, where you're hiding things from each other, you're not clear on what you expect from each other, because you've not sat down and had that conversation where you set that stuff out. And we've just always had this principle right from the start that we know what we want from each other, we know where we stand with each other, we know where our expectations are of each other. And I've always had this attitude of what in England we call calling a spade. Just name things for what they are, and be completely honest and transparent. And that's what's really made it different for us compared to anything else.
We have that same phrase in America, too.
I never know what idioms are in America and what aren't. Even though I've been there 15 times, I've still not. I'm always careful. I never know.
Mine's the same. I don't have anything to add.
Yes, I mean, honesty and trust, and humor.
And keeping your phone on silent.
Well, I said this earlier, but this would be my message to you guys, that it would be a tragedy if you didn't take the risk to try to find the person you love. Yeah. And that involves all sorts of vulnerabilities and failures along the way. But I think a lot of people today, they're comfortable saying, relationships are somehow going to make me lesser of an individual, and the opposite is true, but you have to be willing to do the work. It's like anything that's going to be satisfying in your life, you have to do the work.
I'll just add to that quickly that you also have to have the patience to find love, and I've seen so many people take a relationship that isn't right or isn't as good as they could get because they want it now, and they feel like if they wait, then they're somehow lesser of a person because they're single for. I know people who can't be single for a month. They have to be with someone, and they just don't feel complete. It's a self-esteem problem, really, where they don't feel like they have meaning if somebody's not there with them at the time. So it's also just, if it doesn't happen this year or next year, that probably means there's a better thing coming than what might have happened this year or next year.
I still think honesty is the most important thing, but a couple of things that came to mind while Matt and Tom were talking that sort of feed into that is the self-esteem that we were talking about before, and that I talked about on Tuesday. Because if you do not trust what conclusions you're coming to, and if you don't trust that the things you want and care about are important, then you don't have the courage to be honest about them with yourself or with other people. And that's, courage is the second part. It's scary sometimes to be honest. It's scary to put yourself out there. It's scary to be vulnerable with another person until you have that trust and until you get used to it. Courage is like a muscle. You build it up by doing it, and then as you do it, it gets easier and easier.
Practice makes it perfect. Thank you. So the week of love is coming to its end. Was there anything new that you learned about love during the time we spent together? I guess not.
Do you mean at the conference or in our relationship?
At a conference.
Yeah, I have something, because we're working on this new project where we're trying to explain the difference between what I call the deadly isms, all of the collective isms that have had such a tragic impact on people's lives, and they become sort of a religious crutch for people that are looking for meaning. And the opposite of those are a lot of the values that you laid out in your first talk, and we've been talking about this whole time. And I think love is just a culmination of those things that we very much try to teach people to value, starting with personal integrity and responsibility, and also compassion and empathy, and working up to that. You know, the package deal is love. And this is a powerful word. People abuse it and misuse it all the time and make it something sort of cheap and trite. But I think we could all benefit from appreciating the real power of that word when we are trying. Someone was asking Georgia earlier, how, if I don't want to get into epistemology during dinner with my folks, is there a different way that I can connect? And I think that's what maybe I learned at this conference.
I learned the love shake.
Can you actually do it?
No, Leopold has to teach me later.
I know how to do it.
There's an IOU there,
Yes.
I think, yeah. I think it was Martin's point about mirroring that was the newest for me, although I liked the concept of the love shake as well, but I had always thought about seeing your values in another person, but not necessarily seeing them reflected in the way that he was describing. But now that I think about it and apply it to us, I can totally see it.
I liked the idea that love is the opposite of indifference rather than the opposite of hate. That there are positive and negative kinds of extreme attention on someone, and the opposite of both of them is not paying attention to someone. The famous Howard Rourke line, "I don't think of you, Peter." That's the opposite of love, is when you just don't care about someone. And I think that's going to help me in a lot of respects, because it will make it easier for me to understand other people's interactions with me as well as my own feelings towards them.
That was Taylor Swift doing, not Peter Kay.
Even better and much more appropriate. I was thinking he's kind of friends with Peter, isn't he? Yeah. That's the second time. I said Dagny when I should have said Eddie this morning as well. Yeah.
I'm glad to see that you're not the only man that is constantly corrected by his better.
It goes both ways, doesn't
It does, yeah.
Thank you for answering. This was actually a feedback session, but we tricked you to take your project.
This is for marketing for next year, yeah, I understand.
This is the last question for today. I mean, from the audience, we'll have a lot of them, I guess. Do you believe that love can truly conquer all of the obstacles?
I mean, it's people who conquer obstacles rather than the concepts, I think. It depends on the nature of the obstacle. If the obstacle is a fundamental problem with the love, if it's a fact that the two people who think they're in love are in fact not properly in love, that they don't share the core values, principles. I saw this with a friend of mine who just eventually came to realize that her partner was fundamentally different to her, and it actually was the Ukraine war that triggered their split because they realized they had opposite opinions on that, and she just realized who she was with, basically. And so, that kind of obstacle, it shouldn't overcome because that's a sign that it's just not working. But it can overcome obstacles that are external. Like if you get challenges, like you guys went through your health issue, and if you get issues like that, like you lose family members or you have a fire in your house or something, those sorts of things it can overcome. But it can't overcome a fundamental failure in the relationship itself because then it's broken.
Well, yes, and then if that is the fundamental difference, then it really wasn't true love to start with, to begin with. But I mean, we have gone through a lot in our time together, usually his fault. Never mine, but I mean, we went through a horrible health issue with him. We've lost all 4 of our parents. We've both had some pretty devastating business things occur, but we were able to get through it all because we had each other, as trite as that sounds.
That was a better answer than I'm going to give.
Usually is.
But I'm going to say an absolute yes to the question because we're all here because we're sort of philosophical revolutionaries, right? We believe that these ideas are important enough that we can change the world. So I don't think we should be shy from using words like love as long as we define our terms and make sure that people understand that there is an alternative to conflict. There's an alternative to this sort of collective idea that you owe yourself to somebody else, and that can fundamentally change everything. That's why we're here, and our job is to turn on a new generation to these ideas. So if it sounds like a Hallmark card when you say love will conquer all, maybe that's a great way to hook people in and then to have a more substantive conversation.
Oh, you set me off on a whole new train of thinking, Matt. I'll go with that first. I think if you're looking at love in the broad sense and love for the right things and love acted on, then yes. Not just love for a partner, but love for human potential, love for things that make the world great, for curiosity, for reason, for...
Trains.
Sure, trains, whatever. But there are so many incredible things in the world. I think when I was letting go of religion and really embracing being an atheist, I never wanted to be driven by this nothing. Because atheist literally just means you don't believe in God. But it's like, well, it's not that I don't believe in anything, though, because where I put my hope, what I look up to, is what human beings can do. And love for that, I think, has been really fundamental in me having a positive attitude and carrying on. But it wouldn't matter if I didn't do anything with it. And the same is true with relationships. It doesn't matter how much you feel that emotion towards the other person if you don't act accordingly. If you don't put them in their value hierarchy, if you don't tell them you love them, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you feel if you don't act on it.
I just note that Matt and I are both fans of the band Rush, and there's a Rush lyric that perfectly sums up what you just said.
It had to come up.
which is, I don't have faith in faith, I don't believe in belief, you can call me faithless, but I still cling to hope, and I believe in love, and that's faith enough for me. I think that's quite a nice summation of your message there, that you can believe in yourself and believe in human potential. It's much more meaningful than believing in something that may or may not even exist.
How many Rush concerts have I dragged you to?
Not that many, actually. How many?
I don't know.
You mean you don't have a memorized list of every concert you've been to?
Well, I remember the first one I brought her to, and she didn't leave me after that. So,
That's a good sign.
yeah.
I think we're
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to Q&A. So you can raise your hand already.
Just
Okay.
The story maybe is a little harder.
I don't want to go to the philosophy, but I read a philosopher that described love as love is not a situation or a feeling. To love is to choose. And I want to ask you a bit personal question about when did you choose to love the other person, and how did you know it was the right person to choose to love, if it's not too personal?
Well, I have to
I ask
think
a
about
good question.
It's a good question, yeah.
I think we've asked each other this question, and I don't think we, like we joke, but it's true, we didn't have that aha moment where I saw her on the other side of the room and I said, that's my special lady friend right there. So I think it's a process, and this is probably why it's real work, is that the process never ends, and we are absolutely so different today than when we met, and that is a...
He had a mullet, by the way.
I was trying to be serious, but like it's important, and this is one of the challenges. Like, people are going to change, and I think in our case, mostly, the differences, we're very different people, and we impact each other in a way that has made us both better, I think. And she's going to tell me what's really true.
No, I'm going to answer the question. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, so we went out that first time in May. Actually, I should point out that he actually stood me up on what was supposed to be our very first date. But we did start going out in May.
I just wanted to see if you were serious.
All right, I'm done. But no,
You're storming off.
So seriously, so it was May, and then I joked and said that, you know, I had my last date with someone else in July. So it was 2 months, and I will say I went out. Well, it was my birthday, and I was talking to him on the phone, and I had to hang up from him because Jody was at the front door to take me out to dinner. But then I had to explain to Jody where the roses came from because they came from a third person.
You're just showing off.
But I, you know, I mean, it was that night when I had all of these other things going on, and I just realized that that's not what I wanted, and then I went here. But that was the moment of choice when I realized that nothing else was what I wanted.
I think in terms of how I knew, it was because, you know, we were on other sides of the ocean, and it was because every time we did a video call, I left feeling more energized than I started. I wanted to go out and read more and do more things. I was inspired, in effect. Every single time, no matter what we talked about or how long we talked for.
Except for trains?
You didn't talk about trains that much, though.
He was smart enough not to play that.
Yeah. And in terms of, I think you do make the choice over and over again. But the first really significant time I made the choice was when I decided to come. I'd been working in a job I didn't like very much, not because I didn't like the work, but because I didn't like the people. And I quit that job to do freelancing work, and I, pretty much as soon as I could, given COVID restrictions, came to live with him in the UK for a couple of months. And I was on the plane sitting there thinking, like, I'm crazy. You know, I've only seen this dude maybe 2 weeks in total of all the other times we've seen together, and now I'm going to go live with him. This is insane. But it was fine, even though the first 10 days I was there, I had to isolate in the house with him, so we were together nonstop for 10 whole days, and we didn't argue at all.
So I had a harder decision process because, there's
I'm Matt in this situation.
There's a good reason for this because, yeah, it's kind of inverted, because when we were first getting close, I was still in a relationship, and I'd been in that relationship for 3.5 years. And I had to decide, whilst we were starting to get into all of the lockdown stuff, and even before that, I had to decide to break off a relationship that I'd been in for 3.5 years that I knew wasn't right on a fundamental level, even though I still respect the person, I still like her, and she never did anything wrong by me, but as far as I knew that there wasn't a fundamental values match, and she had a completely different attitude to life to me and wasn't going to support me in the kind of doing this kind of thing, and using my time productively and the kind of life and kind of values politically and personally that I had. So I actually had to make the decision to risk breaking that off for a relationship with somebody who lives half the world away from me, who I'd spent relatively little time in person, and it took me a long time, really, didn't it? Because you got quite frustrated with me for a while of just delaying that decision, and even though I'd already made it, delaying telling who is now my ex my decision. So it was a very hard decision, and it took months and months and months for me to stack up everything in my head and eventually have the honesty and confidence to make what I knew was the right call. And then we had all the COVID stuff and another year or two before I could actually sort of reap the reward of actually having the relationship in full. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but it does, as like Matt said, you have to have the confidence to make the right decision sometimes.
Leopold, now you can ask the question.
Okay, what's the one thing that would completely destroy love or your relationship? Jesus.
We're discussing breakup relationships here.
One thing, if that happens, you go from love to indifference.
A fundamental betrayal of trust.
Yeah.
And that might be cheating, but you can cheat in many different ways. But I think that, because that's everything.
Yeah. What he said.
Ditto.
That is true, and that is fundamental. There are other things. The obvious one is just embracing like evil ideas on a fundamental level, and that's what I had to help my friend get through in her relationship. Is if the person you're with is avowedly anti-human life on a fundamental level, who doesn't respect people's lives, people's freedom, people's people, it's just fundamentally not a good person, then you need to face that. And if you suddenly turned around and started endorsing, the ideas of Alexander Dugin or something, then I would need to call time and say, hang on, that ain't cool. But you wouldn't be the person I fell in love with if you did that. And so you would have to have made a pretty spectacular misread of the person, or have evaded a truth that you could see the whole time.
Or the person has changed. I think somebody brought up at some point unconditional love, and that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in absolutely conditional love. And so if a person changes so fundamentally, which I think would be a form of betrayal of trust, then you have to say, this is, I don't know if you'll go straight to indifference. It would depend on what it was, but that would be where you'd have to step away.
Terry does have some questionable musical choices, and that can get pretty dicey, but we've tried to work through it.
Yeah, for me it was saying that the lead singer of Iron Maiden isn't a good singer.
He's not.
What?
That's the closest it's come.
We'll go to the show together because Terry shares that irrational feeling.
Yeah.
I feel supported.
So I wonder, I know we didn't touch this issue before, but I'm just curious. What do you think would be the objectivist stance on the so-called gender roles affecting a long-term and serious relationship, and whether it did play any role for your cases?
There's a lot baked into that question. I think one important thing to get to first is that a romantic relationship is both a personal and a physical relationship, and you are developing a relationship with the person, which is a totality, and it necessarily includes the physical component. So there's some extent in which Angel's femininity is part of the person who I fell in love with, and if she weren't feminine, and that it just wouldn't work in the same way. Likewise, and so that said, neither of us believes in sort of the socially constructed elements of gender roles that much. Gender is a thing. Biological sex is a thing. It's a fact of reality. Women and men are different in certain respects, but a lot of what we carry around with that is a result of how we're conditioned as we grow up. We don't really care. Like, I'm quite effeminate. I got that from my father. Like, I don't mind acting a bit feminine sometimes, and likewise, you're quite happy to embrace some more masculine aspects as well.
Except at Iron Maiden concerts.
Not of us. Yeah.
I mean, I prance around like a madman at Iron Maiden concerts, so yeah, it's not really my most. It's kind of masculine and not at the same time, but so yeah, there's that. And then another quick point. I don't know if this is something you were touching on, but if a person in a relationship starts going through a gender identity change, then I think it's completely reasonable to not want to stay in that relationship, because the person it's like she said earlier, the person you are with is changing. So it is an essential part of the relationship, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rand made some comments about this that I don't entirely agree with, but I don't think they're fundamental to her philosophy. Where she was saying in the essay, like on a woman president, she was saying that a woman needs to hero worship a man, and the fact is, everybody needs to hero worship somebody. That's not gender specific, and it's good for everybody's psychology. In terms of just the day-to-day sort of social roles, I think you just do what makes sense for the two of you, whatever that looks like. Just fit it to your context and make it work for you guys.
So I might have heard the question a little bit differently, because traditional gender roles invokes in me the old-fashioned way of thinking that you marry a wife, she stays home, barefoot, cooking, pregnant, that kind of thing. And I didn't get that.
But you wouldn't want that.
I absolutely would not want that. And obviously we've married two very strong, independent, badass women. And that was, in my case at least, the best decision I've ever made, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. And we have this fun argument that we go back and forth, because I consider myself in that sense a radical feminist. I believe in strong women that are independent and free to do things that they want. I wish she would cook once in a while, but that's not in the cards.
Yes, he does cook, but I do the laundry, so we share roles. And I had actually something useful and insightful to say, and I completely forgot it.
Sorry.
Maybe it'll come to me.
I'll add something that Matt's comment made me think of, which is there was a girl who I was interested in and sort of pursuing something with for a while. But whenever we spent time together, I would talk about stuff and she would just watch me. And then I would say, what do you think? Is everything good? And she's like, I just want to listen to you. That was the worst relationship I could ever have. Like this kind of void of a person who just wanted me to input stuff all the time. I love the fact that I'm challenged, that I'm encouraged, just the influence that you've had on me, and like the encouragement to grow and to reconsider and to think. And we always call our relationship a partnership of equals. It's and not in the way that like the US-UK relationship is a partnership of equals, like an actual partnership of equals.
We're so much better than you are.
So no, we very much like. Sometimes certain things just one or the other of us does more of. Like I do all the driving for legal reasons, and yeah, there's certain household tasks you do more of than me. But that's not because of gender. It's just because it's how we've agreed to balance things out. But
You book all the travel because you know that better.
yeah, like I'm the guy who knows how to use Google Flights. So, yeah.
Yeah, so guys, I just posted on Instagram that we have like two biggest freedom couples in the panel together, but I would like to ask you what are the other freedom couples that you guys admire, that inspires you? Like, for example, I would go for Lee and Ken Schooler, but I'm just curious what your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, they're a great couple. I would bring up Brad Lips and Stephanie Lips. I mean, they have worked together. Actually, they started dating when they were working together, and now they're working apart, but still within the freedom movement. I would put them up in that category.
I could add a couple if Matt wants to think for a moment. Craig and Sarah Biddle is a really obvious one. More personally, Quent and Linda Cordair, their art gallery and their resistance to the COVID-19 lockdowns, it was really impressive. Those are the two that jump out. I know a couple of others, but I wouldn't want to dilute those two by comparing them. So I think those are the two that really stand out to me.
You got nothing?
I'm blanking out.
Okay.
Yeah, my mind went straight to Craig and Sarah as well.
Yeah.
It's That's a fun one because, you know, Craig is obviously so much more visible and he's here talking to all of you guys all of the time. But Sarah, what Sarah does is just as important. She's just as dedicated to freedom. She just doesn't like to be in the spotlight as much. So it's a good example of how a relationship can work when you don't want to be on stage with the other person every day, you know, which works for some of us, but not for everyone.
I'm sorry, I did forget our colleague Robert Begley and his partner Carrie-Anne Biondi are also an absolute power couple who massively encourage each other, and she is one of the most capable intellectuals I've ever met. So.
One that just came to mind is Mark and Joanne Skousen, who are very much, they run Freedom Fest, and they're very much business partners. They're very different as we are, but those differences make for good division of labor kind of stuff.
So inspired by the report training presentation, I'm interested in how, if you care about each other's self-esteem and ego, and where you're drawn this red line, kind of a protection that you don't want to be touched by your partner, or like to open your doors.
I'm trying to understand. Go ahead.
I don't think there can be any barriers. This gets back to the trust thing. You have to expose those most precious parts of yourself to your partner if you actually want the benefit of that relationship. And that's why it's so risky. That's why it can be dangerous and scary, and it's why I don't think people take that risk sometimes. But there are no barriers in our relationship, trust me.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you have to have a strong enough self-esteem to withstand that. To even if you're saying, you know, for example, telling your partner something that you did in the past that you're not very proud of, you have to trust that they're going to still love you and not just walk out right then and there. And you have to trust that you're still a good person now, even though you made that mistake. For example, just to think of one thing. So yeah, I think we don't have anything that we hide from each other, any barriers. In terms of red lines, it's the other person should always be treating you with respect, and if they're ever not doing that, you need to have a serious rethink about the relationship and perhaps a serious conversation.
I will joke briefly that the early months or a year or so of our relationship was kind of like Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was just declassifying things from the past over and over again, just gradually admitting all of the nonsense that went on, right down to the stupid videos I made about our pet dog. So when I was a kid,
Very funny.
So that was the whole thing. But no, I will say. Do people ever ask you whether you're an introvert or an extrovert? Has anyone ever been asked that ridiculously annoying question? I am both of those things, and I don't understand how anyone could just be one or the other. I need social contact, and I need time alone, and I need both every week, preferably. I get conference fatigue sometimes if I don't do what I did earlier today, which is go out for a walk by myself and just do my own thing. So, although we have no boundaries of things we can't go near, we do have an understanding that both of us need personal time, and that alone time is really valuable to me, to go walking, to do train museums and whatever, all that kind of stuff. That I need that space, and you respect that, which is really valuable to me.
And personal space too. Like, I think it's really good when you're living together to have a part of your home, even if it's just a little tiny corner or shelf that's just yours. In our case, we're lucky enough to have a big enough home that we have our own studies. He does what he wants, even though it's a disaster to my eye, in his study. And I have painted my study purple because that's what I want. And we just have no input on that room because that's my room and his room.
Well, now I realize why I don't have this relationship, so I'm just ready to find my space.
Any other?
That's it.
Oh,
Okay.
sure.
I have a question regarding Matt and Katarina said that I think you asked a question saying that there is the time when you lose your true self. Kind of, you're not yourself when you're with the person you're attracted to physically or mentally. So I want to ask you, if it's not too personal, have you ever lost your true self or somehow how your identity got over with your partners, and how did you came back? How did you communicate that?
I think you may be asking a question based on something I said, and I think about when Terry and I met, I was not my finished true self, and I think
It took a lot of work to get him here.
Yeah, you guys should see who she actually decided to marry, because I was quite a piece of work back then. I think it's a process in a very real way, because as we live and grow and things change and things happen to us, and the impact that Terry has had on my life, I don't in any way see that as losing myself. I see that as growing and becoming hopefully a better person than I was when I met her. So I don't think you ever lose yourself, and everything we're talking about here is very much dependent on us being individual people, but it's not an either or, I don't think.
Right, I mean, you've become a better self. I have seen friends who are in a relationship and they do lose their selves completely. I have a very good friend of mine. She was in a marriage for a while. He passed away, but he didn't like any of her friends except, weirdly, us. So we were the only friends that she had had before that relationship that she was able to continue, and she changed everything about her life for him. And so it does happen, but it hasn't happened with us.
Yeah, I think the example Terry brought up is exactly the type of thing that can happen. I think that's what Katarina was getting at. It hasn't happened with us. I think I came a little bit close with my first boyfriend because I was very young. I didn't quite have a developed sense of self yet. But even then, I still had certain ambitions that kind of I kept for myself, so to speak. So there was that little corner of me that was still me no matter what. But it is when you don't trust who you are, when you don't have that self-esteem, I think you're far more liable to fall into those kinds of traps of, that other person's approval means absolutely everything to you, and so you change everything about yourself for that other person. And I don't think that's very healthy, obviously, but it certainly can happen.
That's an infatuation, and I think it's also the closest I've come to losing myself is when I've been trying to be the right person for someone who I'm not the right person for, who isn't the right person for me, or in my last relationship where I knew it wasn't right, but I just evaded that knowledge and tried to be one person with her and another person the rest of the time, and I was just this kind of guy who watches TV and does little else with his life, and that was my life at home, and then I'd come out to places like this or over to the US and live a totally different life the rest of the time. And that kind of dualism doesn't work. It's kind of like Hank Rearden going from Lillian to Dagny, like realizing that there's a person who is going to enable me to be me 24/7 and support me in that. So it couldn't happen in this relationship, I don't think.
To give a really silly example, Tom hates that my hair is this long, but I like my hair being this long, so I'm not going to cut it. And that's, he disapproves, but so what?
It's not like a moral judgment. I would just prefer it, but it's not my hair, so I don't get to prefer it. But there's all sorts of things. I mean, if I grew a beard, you'd cope, wouldn't you?
I mean, I'd cope,
Yeah.
but I'd complain.
I'd twirl the edges of my moustache.
So Terry basically badgered me into trimming my beard because at one point I looked like the Ayatollah Khomeini.
One of our donors told us that he looked like the Ayatollah, and I thought that was a really good signal that maybe he should change.
So maybe I take back everything I've said. I lost myself and I didn't even know it.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. This was the last session for today. We're going to have competition a bit later. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sitting here even though it was hot.